I never thought a $10 bill tossed into a hat on a street corner would change the course of my day, let alone my whole week. But here I am, sitting in my tiny apartment, still shaking my head at how that moment spiraled into something completely unexpected. You know that feeling when you do a small, almost automatic gesture, like tipping a street performer, and suddenly the whole world seems to tilt just a little? That was me last Saturday, so I was in downtown Seattle, just killing time before meeting a friend for dinner. It was one of those gray, drizzly days, the kind where people rush past each other with umbrellas and no one really looks up. Except for this guy. He was on the corner of Pike Street, right next to that old brick wall covered in faded graffiti. Mid-20s, maybe early 30s, with curly hair that looked like it had a life of its own, and this battered guitar that looked like it had traveled more miles than I have. His voice was raw but somehow soulful, blending perfectly with the sound of rain tapping on the pavement. He was playing this song I didn't recognize, but his passion was obvious. People were mostly passing by, some tossing a glance and moving on. I wasn't expecting much. I usually keep my head down when I walk the streets, but something about his music stopped me. So when he finished the song, I pulled out a $10 bill and dropped it into his open guitar case. That's when things got weird. Instead of just nodding or flashing a quick smile, he looked up at me with these eyes that felt like they were trying to say something more. He didn't say a word, just gave me a little smirk and packed up his guitar faster than I expected. Before I could even finish putting my wallet away, he was suddenly beside me, walking in the same direction. Now, I'm not the type to freak out or anything, but this caught me off guard. I mean, street performers usually move on to the next corner, right? Not follow someone. And definitely not follow someone who just tipped them. I glanced over, trying to figure out if he was just heading somewhere near where I was going. But the way he matched my pace, casually, like he'd known me for years, it was kind of unsettling, but also intriguing. I wanted to say something, "Hey, do you want to grab a coffee or something?" But my throat was dry, and the words didn't come out. So I just kept walking, wondering if I should speed up or just let this play out. It felt like there was a magnetic pull between us, and my brain was scrambling to make sense of it. As we got closer to the busier part of the street, I finally turned to him and asked, "So, do you follow everyone who tips you?" I half laughed, trying to diffuse the awkwardness. He chuckled, this deep, warm sound. "Only the ones I want to know better," he said, his voice low and carrying a hint of mischief. And just like that, the whole afternoon stretched out in front of me, full of possibilities I hadn't even considered just a few minutes earlier. Who was this guy? Why did I feel like I just stumbled into something way bigger than a random encounter on a rainy street corner? I should probably tell you how it all started, because honestly, I'm still not sure where it's going. But if you want, I'll take you back to that moment, the moment I dropped that $10 bill into a hat and accidentally flipped my world upside down. I laughed, half because his answer caught me off guard, and half because I wasn't sure if I was being played or genuinely charming in some weird accidental way. "Well, lucky me then," I said, running a hand through my hair. "So what's your name?" He smiled, that same smirk tugging at his lips. "Eli," he said simply. "And you are?" I told him, and for a moment, we just walked side by side, the usual city noise fading into the background. Something about his presence made the usual chaos feel quieter, like the world had tilted just enough to let a little peace in between the honking cars and chattering crowds. "So Eli," I started, feeling a little braver. "Do you do this every day?" "Just play on the corner and see who sticks around." "Sort of," he said. "I mean, I've been playing music for a while, but the street's been kind of a second home lately. It's honest, you know. No pretense. People either connect or they don't. And sometimes they surprise you." I nodded. "Yeah, I guess that's true." We kept walking, and the rain started to taper off, those wet streets beginning to reflect the city lights just a little brighter. There was a warmth in Eli's eyes that made me want to tell him things I usually kept to myself. But I didn't want to rush it. Sometimes it's better just to listen. So I said, "What made you pick that song?" It sounded really personal. Eli hesitated for a moment, then shrugged. "I guess I just sing what I'm feeling." "That song, it's about not knowing where you're headed, but wanting to find someone who gets it." I looked at him, surprised at how much the words seemed to match what I'd been thinking lately, like life was this messy road, and I was just hoping to find a co-pilot. We eventually found ourselves near a little coffee shop, the kind with fogged-up windows and warm lights spilling onto the sidewalk. Eli paused, looking inside like he was debating whether to go in. I did the same. "Want to grab a cup?" I asked, half hoping he'd say yes. His smile widened. "Yeah, I'd like that." Inside, the smell of coffee and cinnamon wrapped around us. We found a small table by the window and settled in. For the first few minutes, it was just the usual getting to know you stuff. Jobs, hometowns, favorite bands. But there was something beneath it all, a quiet honesty that made the space between words feel fuller. So I said, leaning back, "Do you do this full time? Playing and performing?" Eli shook his head. "Not exactly. I'm between gigs right now. I used to be in a band that toured for a bit, but things didn't exactly pan out. So street performing's kind of my way to keep music alive, pay rent, and stay sane." That hit close to home more than I expected. I work in marketing, a good job, but sometimes I wonder if I'm just going through the motions, waiting for something that feels real. "What about you?" Eli asked. "What's your story?" I shrugged. "Nothing as cool as yours, I'm sure. Just trying to figure things out, I guess. Life, work, the usual." He nodded, understanding. Sometimes those usual things can be the hardest to untangle. We ended up talking for hours, the outside world melting away. I found myself laughing more than I had in weeks, and there was this electric feeling every time our eyes met. It was one of those rare moments where you just know that something important is happening, even if you can't quite put your finger on it. Before I knew it, the coffee shop was closing. We stepped back out onto the street. The night air cool but not cold. The city lights shimmered on the wet pavement, and for a second, everything felt suspended in time. So, Eli said, "Do I get to see you again, or was this just a rainy day fling?" I grinned. "I'd say you've earned at least a second chance." He smiled that crooked smile again, the one that made my stomach flip. "Good, because I intend to stick around a little longer." As we walked away, side by side, I realized I was already looking forward to whatever came next. And honestly, I wasn't sure where this was headed. But for once, that felt pretty damn exciting. The next few days felt like that weird, electric in-between phase you get when something new and unexpected sneaks into your life. You know, the kind where you replay a conversation 100 times, check your phone a little more often, and suddenly every song on the radio reminds you of that person. Yeah, that was me. Eli, and I exchanged numbers before parting that night. I wasn't sure if he was serious about sticking around or if it was just a polite line, but he texted me the next morning, and honestly, I was kind of excited to see what would come of it. By Tuesday, we'd worked up to grabbing lunch together. We met at that little taco joint near my office, a place I'd been to 100 times, but somehow everything tasted different with him there. Eli had this easy laugh and a way of making even the simplest things feel like the start of something. So I said between bites, "How does someone go from touring in a band to performing on the street corners of Seattle?" He grinned, nudging me with his shoulder. "Life's weird like that." The band broke up after a messy fallout. I was sort of forced to reset, figure out what I really wanted. Street performing was never my dream gig. But it's honest, like I said, and it keeps me connected to the music and people. I nodded, thinking about my own job and how sometimes it felt less like a career and more like a trap. I get that. Sometimes I feel like I'm just going through motions, waiting for something real to hit. He looked at me a little more seriously. Maybe you just need to shake things up. Sometimes the universe throws you a curveball, like falling for a street performer who follows you after you tip him. I laughed, feeling warmth spread through my chest. There was something about Eli that made me want to believe in that kind of randomness. Like maybe the universe knew what it was doing. After lunch, we wandered through the nearby park, the city's gray giving way to pockets of green and quiet. We talked about everything and nothing. Music, movies, the stupid things we did as kids. At some point, the conversation slowed, and we just walked, side by side, soaking in the rare calm. "So," Eli said quietly, You ever think about what you really want? Like, if you could just pick something and go all in? I considered that for a moment. Honestly, no, I'm too scared. I mean, what if I fail? Or worse, what if I end up alone? He stopped walking and looked at me, eyes searching. Fear is a powerful thing, but sometimes it's worth taking the risk. Even if it means falling. That hit me harder than I expected. Falling felt dangerous, but maybe it also felt necessary. We stood there for a second, the city's hum, a distant backdrop, and then, without thinking, I reached out and took his hand. His fingers were warm, and when he squeezed back, it felt like the first real connection I'd made in a long time. Maybe falling isn't so bad, I said, voice low. Eli smiled, that mischievous spark returning. You're full of surprises, you know that? Over the next week, we started seeing each other more regularly. Sometimes I'd catch him playing on the corner where we met, and other times we'd discover new spots in the city. Tiny cafes, secret parks, quiet corners by the water. Each moment felt stolen but real, like we were building something fragile and exciting from the ground up. One evening, Eli invited me to a small open mic night at this dive bar tucked away in the industrial part of town. I wasn't sure what to expect, but when he got on stage with his guitar, everything else faded. The dim lights, the scattered crowd, even the smell of spilled beer, all of it disappeared. His voice was raw and honest, the kind that grips you when he sings about hope and heartbreak and the messy middle of trying to figure out who you are. After his set, we sat together in a booth at the back. He was flushed from singing, but his eyes had that soft glow I'd come to love. You were amazing, I told him. Mean it. He shrugged, grinning. Thanks. It feels good to let it out. I reached across the table and brushed a stray curl from his forehead. I'm glad you followed me that day. He looked surprised for a second, then his smile deepened. Me too. That night, as I walked home, I kept replaying everything. The music, his touch, the way he looked at me like I was the only thing that mattered. It was scary and thrilling, all at once. I wasn't sure where this was heading, but I knew one thing for sure. I didn't want it to end anytime soon. And honestly, for the first time in a long time, I was curious to see just how far that $10 bill could take me. After that night at the open mic, things between Eli and me started to feel more real. Not in some cliché, official relationship kind of way, but in that quiet, comfortable way where you start to sense someone slipping into your life like they're meant to be there. Like their presence fills the spaces you didn't even realize were empty. We were still figuring things out, sneaking in stolen hours between his gigs and my work shifts. Seattle's unpredictable weather was in full swing. Rain one minute, sun the next, which somehow matched the rhythm of how our connection was unfolding. Some days were easy and bright, others were stormy and complicated. One afternoon, I found myself wandering toward his usual spot on Pine Street. It was a corner near an old bookstore, the kind with yellowed pages and dusty shelves that smelled of forgotten stories. I wasn't expecting to see him. His street performances were sporadic, and sometimes he disappeared for days without a word. But there he was, sitting cross-legged on the sidewalk with his guitar in his lap, tuning the worn strings with a concentration that made me pause. His curly hair fell over his forehead, and for a moment he looked entirely consumed by the music he was about to play. I hesitated, unsure if I should interrupt or just listen from a distance. Then, without really thinking, I dropped a few bills into his case and sat down beside him on the cold concrete. He glanced over, surprised at first, then smiled, a real, warm smile that made my chest tighten. "Hey," he said softly. "Hey," I replied. "Mind if I stay?" "Not at all." He started strumming, fingers moving effortlessly over the strings. The song was new, something I hadn't heard before. Melancholic, but beautiful, like a whispered secret. As his voice rose and fell, I realized how much this music was a part of him, a language he used to say things he couldn't quite put into words. When he finished, we sat in silence for a while, the city noises filling the gaps between us. "So," I said, breaking the quiet, "what's going on? You've been kind of distant lately." Eli looked down at his guitar, then back up at me. "I guess I've been wrestling with some stuff." The band breakup hit me harder than I let on. Sometimes I wonder if I've made the right choices. I nodded, understanding more than I wanted to admit. I get that. Life doesn't come with a map, and sometimes the detours make you question everything. He sighed. Yeah, but then there are moments like this, when someone shows up unexpectedly, and suddenly things don't feel so heavy. I smiled. Glad I could be your unexpected moment. He laughed softly, then reached out and took my hand. You really are something, you know that? That simple touch sparked something between us, something electric and fragile all at once. I wanted to say 100 things, but all I could manage was a quiet, "I'm here." Over the next few days, Eli opened up a little more. We spent Saturday mornings exploring flea markets and hidden bookstores, afternoons lounging in coffee shops with cheap mugs of chai, and evenings curled up watching old movies in my cramped apartment. It wasn't glamorous, but it felt honest. One night, after a particularly long day, Eli confessed something that caught me off guard. "I'm scared," he said, voice barely above a whisper. "Scared I'm gonna mess this up. Scared that maybe I'm too broken for someone like you." I turned to him, heart pounding. Broken? Eli, I don't think anyone's perfect. And if we waited for perfect, we'd never start. He looked at me, eyes shining with unshed tears. "I want this to work. With you." I squeezed his hand. "Me too. We'll figure it out together." That night, as we lay tangled in each other's arms, all the fears and uncertainties seemed a little less daunting. For the first time in what felt like forever, I believed in the possibility of something real. But just as things were starting to settle, life threw us another curveball, a reminder that love, especially the kind that sneaks up on you on a rainy street corner, is never as simple as it seems. It started with a phone call. Eli's voice was tense when I answered. "Hey, can we talk? There's something I need to tell you." My stomach dropped. "Yeah, of course. What's up?" "I'm coming over." As I waited for him, the quiet in my apartment felt heavy, like the calm before a storm. I didn't know what was coming, but I knew it was going to change everything. When Eli walked through the door, his usual confident smile was gone. Instead, there was a vulnerability in his eyes that made my heart ache. "I wasn't sure how to say this," he began, taking a deep breath, "but I think it's better if I'm honest. I've been offered a chance to join a band again, touring, recording the full deal. It's what I've wanted for years." My mind spun. This was the opportunity he'd been waiting for, the dream he'd put on hold while we found each other. "But?" I prompted gently. He looked down. "I don't want to leave you behind. And I'm scared if I take it, it'll tear us apart." I swallowed hard, emotions swirling. "Eli, I want you to chase your dreams. I don't want to be the reason you hold back." He looked up, eyes searching mine. "Are you sure?" I nodded. "I'm sure, but I want us to try, to see if we can make this work." He smiled, a flicker of hope returning. "Okay, we'll figure it out, together." And just like that, the path ahead was uncertain again. But this time, I felt ready to face it, with him by my side. The days that followed felt like we were suspended between two worlds. On one hand, there was the excitement buzzing in Eli's voice when he talked about the band, new songs, tours, recording sessions. On the other, there was me, trying to hold on to what we had without suffocating the possibility of his dreams. It wasn't easy, I won't lie. Some nights I'd lie awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering if I was doing the right thing by encouraging him. Was I being noble? Or was I just scared to lose him? I didn't have the answers, and honestly, the uncertainty was exhausting. One evening, we met at that same taco joint where we'd first had lunch. The air was thick, with the scent of cumin and grilled meat, the kind of place that felt homey, even if we'd both probably gained a few pounds. Eli was quieter than usual, swirling his drink absent-mindedly as he stared out the window. "Hey," I said, nudging his hand gently. "What's on your mind?" He sighed, then met my gaze. "I don't know if I'm ready for all this. The band, the touring. I mean, it's everything I've wanted, but it also feels like stepping into a storm." I smiled softly. Storms aren't always bad, you know. Sometimes they clear the air. He chuckled, but it was tinged with nervousness. "Yeah, but sometimes they wreck everything in the process." I reached across the table and squeezed his hand. "Whatever happens, we'll figure it out. You're not alone in this." For a moment, the tension between us eased, replaced by something tender. But as we walked out into the cool night air, reality crept back in. "I'll be leaving next week," Eli said quietly, breaking the silence. My heart sank. "Next week?" "Yeah, the band's shooting for a quick tour, and then we'll hit the studio. It's all happening fast." I nodded, trying to keep my voice steady. "So what does that mean for us?" He looked down, then back up with determination. "I want us to try. Long distance, please, Maz, but maybe it's worth it." I laughed dryly. "That's one way to put it." He smiled, that crooked grin that had gotten me from day one. "Look, I know it's complicated, but I don't want to regret not giving this a shot." I wanted to believe him. I really did. But the fear lingered, a quiet voice whispering that this might be the beginning of the end. The next few days were a blur of planning, packing, and stolen moments. We spent our evenings curled up on my couch, talking about everything and nothing, trying to cram months of memories into a handful of nights. There was laughter, tears, and a lot of "I don't want to say goodbyes." On his last night before leaving, we found ourselves back at the bookstore corner where it all began. The rain had returned, soft and steady, like the city was washing away the past and making room for what was to come. Eli pulled out his guitar and played that song he'd first sung to me, the one about not knowing where you're headed, but wanting to find someone who gets it. His voice was raw, honest, and full of all the things we hadn't said. When he finished, he looked at me with those deep eyes, searching and vulnerable. "Promise me something?" "Anything. That no matter what happens, we keep trying, even when it's hard." I swallowed the lump in my throat. "I promise." He leaned in and kissed me, a kiss full of hope and fear and everything in between. The next morning, I watched him disappear into the airport crowds, the weight of goodbye settling in my chest. But despite the ache, there was this strange sense of possibility. Over the next few weeks, we talked as often as we could. Late-night calls, texts sprinkled with silly memes, voice messages filled with half-sung songs. It wasn't perfect, but it was enough to keep the connection alive. One night, months later, Eli surprised me with a video call. His face was tired but glowing, eyes shining with excitement. "We just finished recording the album," he said, grinning. "It feels like a fresh start." I smiled, feeling pride swell in my chest. "That's amazing. I'm so happy for you." He paused, then added softly, "And I'm even happier that I have you." We stayed on the call long after saying goodbye, both of us holding onto the thread that linked our worlds. I realized then that sometimes love isn't about certainty or easy answers. It's about showing up, even when the future is messy and unknown. It's about the moments, the music, the laughter, the quiet promises made in the rain. And maybe, just maybe, that $10 bill dropped into a hat on a rainy street corner wasn't just luck. Maybe it was the start of something worth chasing. Months passed, and the distance between Eli and me felt less like a canyon and more like a challenge we were determined to tackle. We got into this rhythm: late-night video calls when time zones allowed, texts filled with inside jokes, and occasional surprise visits that left me breathless. Those visits were the highlights, moments when the world felt right again, even if only for a little while. But as much as we tried to make it work, reality kept creeping in. The time difference was brutal. His days were packed with rehearsals and recording sessions, while I'd be just waking up or about to crash after a long day at the office. Sometimes I caught myself scrolling through my phone, reading and rereading his messages, trying to fill the space between us, the silence that crept in when his schedule got overwhelming. One particularly rough evening, I was staring at a photo of us from one of his visits, laughing over tacos at that little joint, when my phone buzzed. It was Eli. "Hey," his text said simply. I stared at it for a long time before replying. "Hey." Minutes passed with no response. Then his name popped up on my screen. "Can we video chat?" "I need to see you." I clicked accept without hesitation. His face appeared, a little worn, but still that same familiar warmth shining through. He leaned back, running a hand through his curls, a nervous smile on his lips. "Sorry about the late message," he said. "It's been a long day." I nodded, even though he couldn't see me. "Yeah, me too." Silence settled between us, heavy but not necessarily bad. "I miss you," he blurted out finally. I swallowed down the lump in my throat. "I miss you too." We talked for hours that night, about the toll the distance was taking, about the uncertainty, about the moments when it all felt too much. But beneath it all was this fierce determination not to let go. A few weeks later, Eli called me with news that made my heart race. The band wants me to join a tour across the West Coast. "It's a big deal," he said, voice trembling slightly. "That's incredible," I told him, trying to keep my excitement real. "But it means I'll be gone for months," he added. "I don't want to lose what we have." I paused, weighing the words. "We've already beaten the odds. This is just another chapter. We'll figure it out, again." His relief was palpable. "Thank you for believing in us." The day he left for the tour, I caught a red-eye flight to surprise him at the first stop, Portland. Seeing him step off the bus, guitar slung over his shoulder, was like breathing after being underwater too long. We spent those few days exploring the city, stealing moments between his rehearsals and shows. Watching him perform on stage, bathed in light and music, was like seeing a part of him come alive that I hadn't witnessed before. One night, after a show, we sat on the rooftop of his motel, the city lights flickering below us. "I don't want this to be temporary," I admitted. He took my hand, fingers intertwining with mine. "Then let's make it permanent," I smiled, feeling hope rise like the night breeze. "I'm ready." Months on tour weren't easy. The constant goodbyes, the cramped hotel rooms, the exhaustion. But every text, every call, every stolen moment made it worth it. When Eli's tour finally wrapped up, he flew back to Seattle, and this time, he didn't leave. We moved in together in my little apartment, the same one I'd been sitting in when this all started. It wasn't much, but it was ours. We filled it with music, laughter, and the messy, beautiful chaos of two lives intertwining. One rainy evening, as we sat on the couch listening to Eli play a new song he'd written, I realized how far we'd come, from a chance encounter on a wet street corner to building something real and lasting. He looked over at me, eyes soft. "You dropped that $10 bill like a sign or something," I laughed, leaning into him. Maybe I did, and in that moment, with the rain tapping against the window and his music filling the room, I knew that sometimes the smallest gestures could lead to the biggest love stories. Life didn't suddenly become perfect once Eli moved in. There were still days when the uncertainties crept back in. Money was tight, schedules clashed, and sometimes the city felt too loud for two musicians trying to find their footing. But those moments were quieter now, softened by the fact that we were facing them together. One evening, a few months after we settled into the apartment, I found myself standing at that same corner on Pike Street where it all began. The rain was light, just enough to make the pavement shine. Eli was nearby, packing up his guitar after a brief street performance. Our eyes met, and he gave me that familiar smirk, the one that made my heart skip. I walked over, slipping a $10 bill into his guitar case again, not because I needed to, but because it felt right. The gesture had become a symbol for us, a reminder that sometimes the smallest things can lead you to something unexpected and beautiful. He looked up at me, eyes sparkling. "You're back," he said. "Yeah," I smiled, "and I'm not going anywhere." We stood there for a moment, just two people who had somehow found each other amid the noise and rush of the city. Later that night, as we curled up on the couch, Eli strummed a new melody, soft and hopeful. I rested my head on his shoulder, feeling the steady rhythm of the music and the steady beat of his presence beside me. I realized then that love wasn't some grand, sweeping moment. It was these small, real pieces. The shared coffee, the quiet conversations, the willingness to show up even when things felt uncertain. It was imperfect and messy, but it was ours. Looking back, it all started with a song on a rainy street corner and a $10 bill tossed into a hat. But it grew into something more, a connection rooted in honesty, patience, and the courage to take a chance. And as Eli's voice carried through the room, I knew I was exactly where I was supposed to be. Not because the path had been easy, but because we chose to walk it together.